Hello and welcome to the Responsive Lecture. Today we're going to be talking about designing web applications with responsiveness in mind. And what that means is just keeping in mind what kind of devices that your users are going to be looking at. Are they looking at a desktop? Are they looking at a laptop, a tablet, a phone, things of that nature, so that your application responds to the width or screen size or resolution. So let's go ahead and get started. Why go responsive? Accessibility, the ability to access and understand a site's features and content for all devices and browsers. So when you're looking at a website on your phone, you want to make sure that the website's easy to use, that you can access all the information that you could have access on the desktop version. Usability, ease of use. We all have our phones in our hands, so it's good to have a responsive site, because most of your users or customers will probably be looking at your site on their phones. Sustainability, the ability for a site to work on devices and the capacity to grow and evolve. And performance, speed based on features and content delivered to the user, and efficiency. So those are the four main reasons why you want to go responsive. The future is here. Everyone's looking at tablets and phones and kind of staying away from the desktops. So you want to make sure that your applications or websites are responsive. There are different architectures, but the core ingredients is viewport settings, flexible grid-based layout, flexible images and media queries. In more depth, viewport setting is the responsive metadata used to give browser instructors to control dimensions and scale. So each device has a different viewport. Flexible grid-based layout, that's adaptable design that responds to all mediums. So kind of what I've been talking about previously. Images and video that expand to environment of device. So a lot of times when you're looking at a video, let's say you go to YouTube and you're watching a video, and you can expand to take up the whole screen. Media queries allows content to render and adapt to conditions such as a screen resolution. So you can have different media queries in your CSS that's saying, if it's this size, then make it look like this, in a sense. Responsive versus adaptive. So there is a difference between the two. The alternatives to responsive are native apps built for a specific platform, M.dot sites, which are mobile sites, and adaptive solutions, which involve different code depending on the device. So it's not one hunk of code that's responding, it is different codes adapting to whatever device it's on. To detect, you want to make sure you're keeping in mind your browser version, the make, the operating system, and the screen size. So those are all the things that you want to consider. Some browsers don't support certain fonts that other browsers do, or things like that. You want to avoid certain assumptions. You want to avoid viewport size, assuming what it is, the device orientation. So a lot of times on tablets and phones and even on monitors, we have landscape versus portrait, right? Font size, I highly recommend using EM-based units, and those are responsive. Instead of using pixels, you want to make sure that you're using EM. Feature preferences and input modes, such as a touch screen. If you're working on a phone, you're not going to be able to hover anything because it's a touch. There's no mouse, so you can't hover on a phone. So those are things that you want to take in consideration. If your site does something specific with a hover, that's not going to work on a phone or a tablet. That's only going to work on something that has a mouse, which is going to be like a laptop or a desktop. So when you're querying media, you want it, the best designs, in my opinion, are with mobile first. You have you're keeping in mind of someone being on their phone first, or a small screen first philosophy, so tablets or phones. It helps prioritize your content. So if you're looking at a website on your phone, there's only so much you can see on that small screen. So you're going to have to prioritize your content on your website. What is most important and what do I need them to see in order for them to explore more? It's also followed by a series of mostly mid-width media queries. And I'm going to show you how to do this a little bit later. But essentially, it's saying when you see this in CSS, it's a media query. So at media and then mid with 50 EM. So anything that's written in between these curly brackets is for styles for viewport widths that are 50 EM and up. So if the minimum is 50 EM, and you could put this in pixels, but it's best to keep it in an EM kind of mindset. But just to start off, you can definitely start off with pixels. And then this one's 65 and up. So you can see the difference. And I'll show you an example a little bit later after the slides. And so you can see that in action. Grid systems is a very large part in responsive designs. One of the ones that I will be teaching you, and there are many out there, is Bootstrap's grid system, but there are different kinds. Essentially what a grid system is a composition of horizontal and vertical line sequences which intersect and then are used to arrange content. So just as you can imagine, graph paper where you have all the boxes, it's kind of like a grid system, and then you keep everything aligned because there's lines guiding you. What you want to remember when you are using grid system is that you're going to adjust your layout grid for your binding type. There's other theories and philosophies that are used, such as rule of thirds, splitting your design into thirds, and this is more of a visually appealing approach. Also the Fibonacci sequence and golden rule to help guide the font size for your paragraph and heading text. So as humans, we like seeing things a certain way, and in nature and through studies, it has been shown that splitting it into thirds, or the golden rule where you have, let me show you an example of the golden rule here, so you can better understand what I'm talking about here. So we have here, drag this over, the golden rule design. So we see that this is visually appealing, these box sizes, and you want to keep that in mind when you're designing your site. So this is without the swirls. So it kind of flows right in our mind. So as I mentioned before, there are different types of grids. You have, and I'm not going to go into these in great detail, but just so you can be aware that they do exist. If you're working with one and you decide that's not what you like, you want to work with a different kind. You have fixed, responsive fixed, fluid, max width fluid, responsive fluid, multiple grids, nested grids, and push pull. And just to go into a little bit more detail, fixed is going to be a standard grid layout defining amount of columns, column width, and gutter width. Responsive fix will adapt to the available display width intended. So it's going to respond. A fluid uses percentages of the total available width of the columns. So if my screen is half the size, then it's going to use a percentage of what's available of the screen. Max width fluid is a fluid grid that has a maximum total width. Responsive fluid is a fluid grid that changes its layouts at certain breakpoints. So those are kind of like the media queries. Multiple grids, different grid layouts on the same page. Nested grid, a grid inside your grid inside your grid. And push-pull, it adds empty columns into the grid, or you can swap the order of columns from how they appear in the source. So those are different types of grids. I recommend that you do a little bit of research and kind of see which one you like best. You want to also keep in mind that you want to be responsive first, because once you build a site and then decide to make it responsive, you're going to put a lot of work on your hands instead of just being responsive from the get-go. So that takes me into media queries. What is a media query? It's a feature of CSS that enable web page content to adapt to different screen sizes and resolution. So just as I showed you before, you're going to have at media, and then you'll have, there's different variations. You could do max width, min width. Most commonly, you'll see min width. And I'm going to show you this exact example in practice. So before we dive into that, it's just saying when the min width is 750 pixels, then the paragraph font size is going to be 62 pixels. So 750 and up pixel wise, as far as the width of our screen, the paragraph tags is going to be 62 pixels. Okay. There's also CSS frameworks that you'll be working with. So you want to thank the developers before you for creating these frameworks, because it saves us a lot of work. It's basically pre-written CSS, and we just use this class name. So you can definitely overwrite what's been written, but a lot of what you would have written yourself is pre-written. So we'll go over Bootstrap and Flexbox. So with Flexbox, and I'll show you how to use it, but essentially in your CSS rule that you have for whatever item, you want to have your display be flex. So commonly before you saw display block or inline block or none or absolute, I think it was. You want it to be flex in order for you to use Flexbox. And then within that, there's other properties that you have. Justify content, align items, and flex direction. Justify content is kind of how you space it. So flex start is going to be kind of left justified. Flex end is going to be right justified. Center is obviously center. Space between is going to be even space between the items. So let's say you have 3 photos in a row. The space between is going to be equal between them. Space around means that the space around the items is going to be equal. So there's a slight difference between the two. Align items is going to be dealing with the vertical alignment. So you have start, end, center, baseline, and stretch. So stretch is going to be, I think it's in Word justified, where it spreads out the letters evenly, so it stretches out through the whole line. Also, there's flex direction. So if you want it in a row, or if you want to flip the order of them, row reverse, and then column reverse. So that is Flexbox and Bootstrap, and we'll see these in practice so you can see. So let's go ahead and make some responsive magic happen. So I have some pre-written code, but let me just show you a few things before we jump into that. So right here, if we go to getbootstrap.com and go to Get Started, there is a starter template here that you can copy and paste into your code. And also you have the responsive meta tag. So you want to make sure that this is in your head. I believe they have it already in the starter template. So in the starter template, you can just copy and paste that into your code. So then you have all the CDNs that you need and all the JavaScript and jQuery that you need in order to get Bootstrap working. So I've gone ahead and done that. So this is what I have here. And I just have a heading 1 tag here and here, and then some paragraphs and some images. So if we look at what that looks like, it looks something like this. I have 2 headings, and then I have 3 paragraphs and 3 images. We're going to make the paragraphs responsive columns using Bootstrap. So how we do that is by using the Bootstrap grid system. So if we look here, see, they changed their website. See, grid. Okay, so if you go to layout, then grid, you see how the grid system works. So essentially, the grid options that you have is you can split it up into columns, and as many columns as you need, as long as it adds up to 12. 12 is the magic number. So if I wanted to evenly split 3 paragraphs, my column sizes would be size 4, because 4 plus 4 plus 4 equals 12. If I wanted 2, that'd be 2 sixes. If I wanted 12 separate columns, they'd be size 1. And here it shows you the sizes that you have. So let's say that on a large screen, you wanted it to be 4 columns or 3 columns. But if you're on a smaller screen, like an iPhone, then you want them to be their own column. So they're all in their separate rows. So let me go ahead and show you how we do that. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that the parent element, and that's the div here because the paragraph tags are inside of this div, are of class row. And then you're going to have a div for each of these for them to be their separate columns. So I'm going to go ahead and write that. Oops. Hold on. Oops. It is not clicking where I want it to click. You know what? I'll just do this individually. So I said that it was going to be 4. So I'm going to do menu 4. And I'll just copy that here and here. And let's not forget to close our divs. Save that. So 4 plus 4 plus 4 equals 12, and this is 1 row. So you can have multiple rows that add up to 12. So maybe I wanted this one to have 3, and then the next row I want to have 2 columns. So they would be 2 sixes, like called medium 6 or large or extra large, whatever your break point you want to set for that. Okay, so if I save that and I go back here, I have it separated into my columns. Now it's on medium, so let's adjust this to see what happens when the screen goes smaller. So you see that it is adjusting as I adjust this. So it is responsive. Okay. All right. So that is how to make it responsive. So you could do that with paragraphs, headings, images, tables, whatever content you have inside of your site. You can use the Bootstrap grid system to make it responsive. And that is the great thing about Bootstrap, is that a lot of everything is kind of built in responsive for you. So you want to keep this in mind from the get-go when you're building your site. Now, if we look here and I wanted to make these images responsive using Flexbox, I can go ahead and create a class here. The parent class, I'm going to call it Flexi. And here we have the parent class Flexi. So now in my CSS, I'm going to have the class Flexi, and it is going to have the display of flex. And then let's say I want to justify my content, and let's say I want it to have even space around them, and I want them to be center. So I'll save that and we'll see how those changes. And there they are. So now if we adjust this space is responsive to that. Okay. A great resource for Flexbox is, now if we want to see some other properties with Flexbox, we can definitely do that. Let's see here. Let's say I wanted it to be flex direction. I want to make it a column and I want to reverse it. So let's remember that it's pizza, ramen, burger. And let's reverse. So now it's burger, ramen, pizza. Okay. So a great resource to use to practice Flexbox is Flexbox Froggy. It is a great interactive site that allows you to practice Flexbox itself. So for example, say here, originally we had it like this and we wanted to put it on their lily pad. So it would be justify content and let's say space around. Let's try that one. So space around didn't really work. So how about space between? That works perfectly. So this is a great practice for you to get used to Flexbox, and Flexbox is the way of the future, in my opinion, for CSS. It's a great tool because if you have messed around with CSS, you know that sometimes it can be a total headache because things are not going exactly where you want it to go, or it's not responding to the things that you want it to respond to. And then you have to deal with display and position properties and margins and padding, and that can go so many which ways. So using Bootstrap and Flexbox is definitely going to save you a lot of heartache, and it's just going to make things a lot easier for you. Just to show you media queries here, let's say I had media query and my min width is 750 pixels, and I said my paragraph is going to have the font size of 62 pixels, something really big. Okay, so if I go back here, refresh this, we see that that changed. But if we make this smaller, oops, actually, there we go. So we see once it hits a 750 point, which is right here, it jumps up in size. When this is below 750, it is of normal size. So that's how you can use media queries. And you can also add different properties. Like let's say once it gets to that size, I don't want to change the font size. I just want to change the color, and I want it to be blue. So if we go back here, we refresh. Once it hit that certain point, it turned blue. Okay, so that's how you can keep in mind and change your CSS depending on the size. So if I'm looking at this on a phone and I want it to be different colors for whatever reason, or a different size, or have different things, then I would use a media query for that. And that is all I have for responsive design. If you have any questions, please Slack me at cassandra.matos, or you can email me at cassandra.matos-mendez@codercamps.com. Thank you for listening and have a great day.